What's up, everybody? Let's talk Jets Radio, part two, training camp preview, talking running backs. And this entire group hinges on one player, and that is Breece Hall. What kind of player are the Jets getting back, coming back off an ACL injury? We've seen this a lot of times with other players where sometimes it takes a year, sometimes 2 years before they get back to full speed, before they get that burst back, before they feel comfortable and confident making all those cuts and taking hits and things like that. So I think we'll figure it out pretty soon, within the first week or two of training camp, what the timeline is for Breece Hall. Is he going to be ready for week one? And in what kind of role? In what kind of capacity? Are we talking a 50-50 split? Is he able to, take on a bigger workload? Are we talking about week 6 or 7 before we see him or before we see that expanded workload? So a lot of questions for Breece Hall to answer. I think if anything, you're talking about a young player here that is part of your long-term plans. So it makes sense to try to preserve him as much as you can early on. Obviously, you have a tough schedule. You want to be able to utilize him and win these games, but you also want him there for December, for January, for those low-scoring, tough, cold weather playoff games where he could be a deciding factor. He looked like one of the top running backs in all of football last year before he went down. So very curious to see where he's at and if he has that burst and how long it might take before he gets it back. So now beyond him, what do you have in Michael Carter? Because the player that we saw in year one versus the player that we saw in year two were completely different. In year one, Michael Carter was impossible to bring down. He was like a bowling ball, just yards after contact almost every single time he touched the football. And then last year, it didn't seem like he had that same kind of burst, that same kind of physicality. He went down pretty quickly. And for whatever reason, again, he didn't look as explosive. So he did have the ankle injury at one point. Was that holding him back, or is it something else? So curious to see what kind of workload he gets early on in training camp, also because you could legitimately make an argument that he could be your number two back if he looks like year one Michael Carter, or possibly he could be a cut because you're talking about a player now that's in year three. You just drafted a kid in Abediconda who brings a different kind of skill set to the table with that home run speed. You also have Zonovan Knight, who was pretty impressive, who it kind of felt like jumped Michael Carter on the depth chart last year, as he got the expanded role towards the end of the season. And then you also have a kid in Travis Dye, an undrafted free agent. He's got some ability coming out of USC. But if you don't see that explosiveness and that same gear out of Michael Carter, there's also a legit possibility that the Jets could bring in another veteran running back. Saleh didn't completely dismiss the idea of adding Dalvin Cook. Obviously, you got to see if that can work out financially. But you still have other guys out there, like Kareem Hunt's still out there. Who are some of the other guys? There's a few different running backs: Leonard Fournette, Zeke Elliott. So you wonder, are they looking for a guy that could potentially split carries with Breece Hall? Are they simply looking for a goal line back, somebody that can get the short yardage, a bigger guy like Fournette, something that they struggled with last year? So very curious to see what we see in the first 2 weeks of training camp, in particular from Breece Hall. Obviously, I don't expect to see him very much in the first few weeks, if at all, in the preseason. But what kind of work is he doing? Is he involved with 7-on-7s? Is he doing walkthroughs? You probably don't see him in any live 11-on-11s, any tackling drills early on. But that's all the more reason that there's going to be an emphasis on the backup running back spot, and there's going to be a spotlight on Michael Carter. I think if he looks good, you could probably feel pretty comfortable with the group as a whole. If he's struggling, I think most definitely the Jets are going to add another veteran to the group.